numbers, quotients, and remainders with up to 4-digit dividends, 1-digit divisors, using strategies based on place value and properties of operations and or the relationship between multiplication and division. Illustrate the example by calculation of using equations, regular arrays, and or area models. Now that's an example of a standard. That in itself is not bad, but I gotta tell you, I'm bothered by that for only one reason. I got college graduates coming to me who can't do that. So, when I see this, is the standard a bad thing? No. The standard in itself, because they're defining what? A process of evaluation. We expect our children to get this level of knowledge. And by the way, that was for grade 4. Now, remember when you were in grade 4, I don't know, it's been a long time for me, but I don't remember, looking at standards like that. I can promise you that. The statistics we got was how many baseballs did we hit over the fence. That was about the only statistic we were interested in. But here's the deal. Common Core is skewed in terms of a standard according to these professors because the step 1 precedes a step 6, and these are the big complaints from academic heads. That means simply that some of these standards are misaligned. I think those are easy fixes. So that would be a concern we should have as participants of a standard that is going to be placed upon us. Are the things in the correct order that need to be in the correct order? They're not currently. Left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. There are extraneous comparisons. Common Core, for example, does not perform to expectations in Canada. Why? Because they're not a part of that, and they do perform superbly. So their argument is you don't need a standard to perform well. Well, that's an interesting argument, but that's for another day. There is a coercive federal government on the state government's funds for allowing and following these programs. This is the big problem that we should be concerned with. What level can a government do to use this standard and leverage what they want in terms of their standard? I think that's a realistic question here. And so this is where I see a separation. I see a framework that defines these are the things we need to do to expect success with our kids. In and of itself, that is not a bad thing. Now what we need to do is examine what are the ideal standards. What is the ideal standard in this? States' grasp of student requirements versus the federal government defining into the population is one standard. The second is studies concluded that CCS do not represent meaningful improvement. And does ignoring research and technology advances by testing in ways similar to current standards meet a new standard? Children today are deprived of actual history. They're not taught history today. Why is that? History, we say, if you don't learn history, what are you going to do? Yeah, see, everybody knows this, but why aren't we putting the history component into this? Nurturing and growing of intellect is how we used to do it. There's a component of being intellectual that is spawned by what? Inspiration. Can a standard be used to inspire? I have no such answer. The actual quotes from historical artifacts are that I'm used to seeing that makes us a successful country was any citation from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jesus Christ. These were the standards that we established this country with, and when we went away from this standard, that's when things gone awry. That's been my study in a conclusion. Any substantive advancement of Christianity is the norm. So the question to me is, if I have a standard here that is worthy of placement, who's going to be putting the input into that standard? Therein lies the dig. So when we look at our legislators, are they going to support the standards you have versus what they want your children to have? Schools teach children, for example, today that polytheism is just as acceptable as monotheism. Pagan concepts of pantheism, God is in everything. Heterosexuality is no longer the de facto standard in terms of acceptable lifestyle. Other religions are more acceptable. Parents are the enemy. These are the standards that they're putting into schools. Is this acceptable? So you got to look at follow the money. Follow the money. Where does this money come from? The feds. The feds. Okay? So How did our nation's founding fathers put this into place? What is the standard we should be looking to? We have a framework that can potentially work. I think it can. As a system architect, I see the good in this. However, if you look at the American Political Science Review study from 1760 through 1885, would it surprise you to note that 94% are directly related to the Bible, every single aspect of our society? Of those, 34% are directly quoted from the Bible. 60% of all men who base their ideas of our form of government followed the Bible. What was the most quoted book? Deuteronomy. It's no surprise. We went away from that stand. General George Washington is impossible to govern rightly without God and the Bible. That was his conclusion after his tenure as president. And I got many other such quotes. So what went wrong? Why did this standard change? Why did this standard be, well, started, of course, in '63 when we removed the Bible and prayer from school. This was in the Abington Township versus Shemp, US 203. What were the contributors to departures from this principle? What are the architects of this? Secular humanism is a waging of war on America's standards. And they are after who? Your children, my children. That's who they're after. Common Core isn't the enemy here, my friends. That's just a framework. What we really have to understand as a political body is that there is an enemy who wants to establish a standard using this as the front. Now, what would happen if we put these same principles within a common core? You have to beg the question. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said about his views on secular humanity is that Christianity preaches only servitude and dependence. George Frederick Hegel waged morality, religion are subordinated to human authority. This is the things they're teaching our children. I can go on and on here, but I'd be duplicating the pattern over and over and over here. But let me take you to the modern times, 21st century. There's an interesting individual, John Dewey. He was Hegelian trained by George Sylvester Morris. He was a student of Soviet socialism and humanism. He wrote The Common Faith based on Marxism in 1934. He dedicated his life to educational reform. And he said, for example, that there is no God, there is no soul, there is no room for fixed natural law or moral absolutes. He also wrote the Pedagogic Creed, and the true center of correlation of the school subjects is not science, not literature, nor history, nor geography, but the child's social activities. What's the pattern you see happening today? So, who's the enemy? Is it a framework, or is it the impetus putting the standard in place? Where does the money come from? National Education Association is one who espouses many of these principles. So I would say that if you look at how do you recognize these patterns, look to these groups. Who is the NEA? Who is the People for the American Way? Who is Planned Parenthood? All of these groups that are funding these efforts is where the standards are coming from. That's why we're falling short. We're not focusing on who the enemy is. So, what can we possibly accumulate and what can we accomplish here? If we don't go back to basics, how would a child recognize the arts that came from the Bible, the creation of Adam from the Sistine Chapel, or Pieta, Michelangelo, or Daniel in the Lion's Den? There's two basic things here, two arguments. There's ideology and core standards. Core standards are nothing but a framework. If CCS is unproductive in its implementation, have it rescinded. If existing ideology hinders our children, then become a change agent to that. Wage the war in the right plane. I love Ronald Reagan. I can only conclude with his speech from '76. I have long believed there was a divine plan that placed this land here to be found by people of a special kind, that we have a rendezvous with destiny. Yes, there is a spirit moving in this land. It's the hunger of the people for spiritual revival. If the task I see should be given to me, I would only pray that I could perform perform in a way that would serve God. Mr. Chairman.